Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. I'm David Shaw, the Publishing Director for Family Business Magazine, and as always, I'm very glad that you could join us today. Our webinar today focuses on how rising gens can tackle their toughest talks. According to a recent study, more than half of rising gens admit that they struggle to communicate effectively with their families, and that this disconnect can lead to unresolved issues that over time create tension and impact both family relationships and business operations. Our speaker today, Professor Christina Wing, will explore how power dynamics, fear of conflict, and concerns about appearing ungrateful contribute to avoiding difficult conversations. But before we begin, if you haven't joined one of our webinars in the past, here are some housekeeping details. We welcome your questions and especially your thoughts and comments throughout this session. Use the question box to the bottom of your screen underneath where you see the slide. And Professor Wing encourages you to be as interactive as you'd like with this session. So use that functionality as best you can. We'll have 3 polling questions for you, and we'll go for no more than 60 minutes today and get to as many questions and comments as we can. And yes, you'll receive a copy of the slides we'll use as well. So joining me today is Professor Christina Wing, the founder of Wingspan Legacy Partners and a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. She helps families navigate the intersection of family dynamics, business operations, wealth, and legacy. Christina, who grew up in a family business, also brings a deep personal experience to her work. She also served as the president of a large single-family office, so she knows what she's talking about. Welcome, Christina. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to leave this to you now, and I will be back with questions and polls.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm really excited to be with you. And as stated, please ask questions, bring up things, be provocative, whatever you would like. The only thing that bothers me about this is that I can't see you all and see your reactions. So share them, please. So why are family enterprises so important? Why are we even talking about any of this? I believe that families have the biggest ability to impact society. And what I mean by that is, as business owners, you do more for the communities that you live in locally and globally than big government. And so why do I think we have to talk about things? Because if we don't talk about things, your family business won't probably continue. And we want them to continue in many different forms. Difficult conversations. Something I would say about this is there's a difference between a difficult conversation and venting. And so today we're going to talk about difficult conversations. We're not going to talk about the venting that you might do to somebody. To have a difficult conversation, you have to have a common goal. And so I just want to clarify that because there's a big difference between the two. And so to get started, I want to start with a poll. And I want to know if in your family there is a problem discussing succession, governance. If you don't talk about it, or if you talk about it but you disagree, whatever it may be, if you can answer this, we'll then get some reactions to the whys.
So, I have sent the poll out, and I will be back when we have results. Thank you.
Wonderful. And so, if you sit back and you think, why do people in general avoid difficult conversations? Frequently, it's because of power dynamic, a cultural norm. I work with students and families around the world that it's just not acceptable to ask certain questions of people that might be older than you. There's also this fear of, if you're asking certain questions or talking about things that you want something, i.e., you want to know about the estate planning. Well, that means you want money. Well, there's a different way to ask it. We always say if you can flip it around and turn it into a discussion where it's much more of a, what is my responsibility? How can I help you? You can open up these difficult conversations in many, many different ways. But to get there, to start, if you think about many families, and I ask this of all my students and many of the people where I give speeches, what do families talk about? And overwhelmingly, families talk about food, they talk about sports, they talk about the weather, they talk about their pets, they talk about entertainment. They don't typically sit around and talk about things that are more difficult. And so it's almost similar to if you're walking by somebody on the street and you say, "Hi, how are you?" You don't stop to hear the answer. It's more of a just habit. So it's like, "Hi, how are you?" And you keep going. Can you imagine if everybody that you walked by that you say, "Hey, how are you?" you actually stopped and listened to the answer? I think it would be startling to the people. Similarly, in family businesses, it becomes startling when a topic comes up that is greater than these issues. This is the comfort. This is what we want to talk about. And what families don't talk about is actually what can destroy them and can make everything in everybody's life much more difficult. And so we want to sit here today, address what some of those topics are and the consequences of not having the conversation, but then the way to have them. David?
Yes, I do have the polling results for you. Do you find it difficult to discuss matters like succession and governance with your family? 75.6% say yes, and 24.4% say no. I'm sending these results out to the audience. What you need to do is just press the little X in the corner of those results and they'll drop from your screen. And as a note, if you're using an iPhone or an iPad to view this, that survey as it shows up might be under the screen that you see if you can't find it. So anyway, everyone's got that those polling results, and I will come back almost immediately for the next poll.
Wonderful, wonderful. 75%, let's call it, don't feel comfortable talking about governance and succession. That's even higher than what I've seen recently in other settings. And I wonder if, given we can't all see each other, we're being even more honest than people are when they're in a public setting where we can see their faces. The problem with not talking about those two topics means that you don't have the scaffolding to protect your family. You don't have an idea of what's coming. I always think about succession stories and which ones are successful and which ones aren't. And let's go for a minute to the monarchy. And, we had Queen Elizabeth in her role for a very long time. Her succession plan was basically to turn it over to her son when she died. And we don't know when we're going to die. And so a better succession plan would have been for her to pick a date and a time and endorse now King Charles and address it. But instead, it was complete uncertainty. What that uncertainty does is, for the 75 years that King Charles was waiting, he probably didn't always use his time to the best of his advantage because he didn't know when his job was going to start. And so with succession, the most important part of it is kind of having like the day of the race. The succession is going to happen here. Some level of understanding allows people to get on board, to understand, to know their role. The other thing, around governance in general, when governance is not only in place, but actually understood and communicated to a family, you know the rules of the game. You might know that you can never work in the family business. There might be an in-law policy that no in-law can ever work in the family business. The beautiful thing about that is it's not personal. It's a rule across the board. And so when we actually take the time to create governance, because these are businesses, we take the time to create it, and we follow it, we end up with intentionality around our business that's good for not only the family, but all other stakeholders. Because let's be clear, family businesses have, other employees, they have customers, they have a societal responsibility. Knowing what's going to happen builds trust amongst all of those stakeholders. And so we've got to start talking about it. Why do we delay it? We delay it because we typically wait till it's too late. Let's say the founder is suddenly in her late 70s. Bad time to start talking about succession, because suddenly said founder feels like you're saying, I'm too old. If you start talking about succession at the beginning, like when somebody's 40 or 50, then it's not about age and relevancy. It's actually about what the process is going to be inside an organization. And I believe that if succession is going to happen properly, there not only needs to be clarity around the timing, the who's in contention, but also that clarity needs to be there for the people in contention, but for the ones not in contention, because then they can go live their best lives. In families that do everything on merit, and some family members aren't going to be qualified to work in the business, knowing that there are rules and ways you can come in or out helps those family members go do other great things in their life. So we've got to start talking about these two things, and you got to talk about it as early as possible so it's less personal. So if we go to the next slide, we have another poll that I want to get into. And this one is, has your family discussed estate planning, inheritance, ownership? Have you discussed it?
I'm fielding that poll right now. And then I had a question for you, Christina, because the idea of planning succession, doing succession planning early is exactly right. But how does a rising gen or the whole rising gen raise that question of succession planning, just the planning part, not succession itself, but shouldn't we be planning without seeming like they're trying to take over?
So many times a founder is the biggest risk to the business. So the hardest succession tends to be G1 to G2, because G1 has the baby, the company built it, and it's hard. It gets easier after it's been done a couple times. The way to have the discussion is to not have it be personal. So grab an article from the paper of a succession that went poorly, a succession that happened because somebody died suddenly, a succession that happened for some tragedy, and start to have the conversation with your family around, we have key roles inside our business that if something were to happen to them, that puts the company at the biggest risk. And don't just make it about the founder CEO succession, make it about the whole C-suite, so to speak, so that there is a constant reevaluation of what is the best talent. If you kind of go marching in to the chairman or CEO's office and say, when are you retiring? Or when is it my shot? Or am I going to get a shot? The first thing that person's going to do is back up, because you're coming after their job. If you go in and you say, Grandma, look at this. Can you believe this company is so brilliant? They didn't have a succession plan, and said person died in a plane crash. What do you think is going to happen? Suddenly Grandma's like, well, what would happen if something happened to me? And then they start talking about it, and they start thinking about what would happen, what's the scaffolding we need, and it leads to other governance. And so when we start talking about succession of a G1, we start talking about what protection do we need in the company in addition, meaning, do we need to have a better board? Because if something happens to the founder, it would be nice to have a board there to also groom the next CEO or whatnot. We also start talking about it in the context of maybe the founder moves into being chairman of the board, still feels really relevant, but doesn't do the things that he or she used to be doing daily. Mm-hmm. When succession goes really poorly is when the person in the role actually still thinks they're completely doing the job, and they haven't been, but they think they are. And so they don't understand why they should move into a separate place. And that is when the people that are kind of doing the job behind the scenes get frustrated and they blow up.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you. And here are our results. So I'm sending these results off to the audience right now, but has your family discussed estate planning, inheritance, ownership with your generation? Yes looks like 69.2%. 68 right around 68.9, and then 31.1% no.
Well, those numbers are staggeringly positive in comparison to the rest of the world. I'll show you a little statistic here, which is, sorry.
I took the wrong one down. So.
There you go. So this is a survey that has been done by Brown Brothers. And as you can see, maybe because your audience is educated in all these things and attends and listens to things with you, that they've talked about it more. But the majority of people have not talked about this. And so what I would love to know, and maybe some of the guests will write in, who initiated the conversation? Do you happen to have the most elegant family in the world and they initiated it with you, meaning the now gen to the rising, or did the rising gen ask? But along this point, what I say is there are several reasons that this doesn't happen. And the reasons people don't talk about it is because many times people correlate estate planning with death. And estate planning is for the living. And so the estate planning and knowing it is for those that are going to survive the person that passed on. And what's interesting is, why wouldn't you want the people that are going to have a responsibility when you're no longer there to actually know what their role and responsibility is? And so if we can separate discussing estate planning from money, like what are you going to get? That is when we start to have real conversations about things. And, parents don't want to disappoint their children. The other reason that many don't talk about it is they don't want to hear if you're not satisfied with their plan. Another reason is inevitably in many estate planning sessions, if you're a family with 4 children, you might be giving inheritance equally, but giving more power to one child to be an executor or to have a bigger role. And so it's also hard for parents to discuss that because it feels like they're picking one of you. But what I would say is it's so much easier, if any parents are listening, to have the family know that you picked one person and why, instead of assuming when they find out upon your death that, oh, you just loved Christina more. You cannot give people a chance to ask questions when you're dead. And so if you talk about it while you're alive, you really clarify many of the things that people need to know. Another thing I would say about this is estate planning is something that is similar to a balance sheet. It's a snapshot in time. If you have discussed estate planning with your family, that doesn't mean you never talk about it again, because it also should change. We have many families where we go in and help them, like at the health check, review their estate planning. Some of the trustees in their estate planning have died, or they're no longer friends with people, or the wealth has changed at such a magnitude that they want to redo it. So, when you do estate planning, that's the beginning. Updating it continuously and communicating it is the real gift and the real act of estate planning.
I am coming on here for a quick second because there were a couple of responses to your question about why the response on estate planning was better. One that I thought was really excellent was my mom's the reason why we did our information more quickly, especially because her dad didn't communicate anything to her and she wanted to do it better. So I thank you for that comment. And then there was a question, which is, what is an appropriate age or point to begin bringing up inheritance, estate planning, et cetera, in conversations with the next generation? Is there an appropriate age?
Well, the earlier the better is my first answer. Some people will disagree with me and say, well, if you talk about wealth with young people, they might not have the same motivation. I don't think when you communicate estate planning, you need to be clear about an exact dollar amount. You need to be clear about intention. So for families in business, the estate planning could be as simple in terms of communication of saying to 3 children, my wish and my estate plan is the 3 of you are going to own the company equally. Yeah. That doesn't mean I need to tell them the company's worth $1 billion. It just means you're going to own it equally, and your responsibility is going to be X, Y, Z. I think teaching people that are going to be inheritors of a business or money what their responsibility is and how to do that only works if you start early. And so if someone's going to inherit a lot of money, I want them to understand financial literacy early. I want them to understand that there are bad actors out there that might take advantage of them. Right. I want them to really understand what is going to be coming at them. I don't necessarily want to tell them the exact amount, but I want them to be prepared, because the preparation is something that the giver should give along with the inheritance.
Right. Well, there's another comment that came in here too, and it's for the current generation out there listening, which is, I am currently a surprise executor for my uncle who passed away less than 2 months after remarrying and not updating his documents. It has been awful. So making sure that you get this all updated too is very important.
Well, to both that comment and the comment of the previous one that said that they're informed because of their mom, I have a similar story. So my dad died suddenly about 10 years ago at the age of 68 and was one of the smartest people I've ever known. I would have thought everything in his life was completely buttoned up. Number one, I never asked him, because I definitely felt if I asked him, he would think I was asking because I wanted to know what I was getting. And so I fell victim to one of the biggest things there. When he died, my brother and I had 2 years of total hell unwinding his estate and figuring out, and for somebody that was such a control freak, he did not have any control of what happened because he didn't help us. And I'm sure that we made some mistakes and we have to forgive ourselves for that. But if you aren't told what's going on, you can only do the best that you can. And it's really hard to mourn somebody and also be upset with them at the same time. And I really can't state this enough. And there are so many examples. I have a family that I work with in Australia that the will has been in legal battles for 14 years. When the person died, the estate was worth $1.2 billion. The estate is worth under 50 million right now because the lawyers have been fighting, the kids have been fighting. Nobody really knows what's going on. There was a will that was done maybe 10 years before this gentleman died, but he was in the process of updating his will. It was all done, it just wasn't signed. And so all these bad actors kind of came together. And I'll tell you, the only people that have gotten money out of this estate are the lawyers.
The lawyers.
And they have gotten money for 15 years. And it's tragic. On top of it, this man's intention was to leave 80% of his wealth to charities. They've gotten nothing. So the lawyers have gotten it, the government's gotten it, and the foundation hasn't been funded because there's so much fighting. And so I teach that case in my MBA class, and the jaws drop. And the next day I always ask, so what did everybody do? I called my parents. That's what they did. And so take that case to your parents, and that might start the conversation.
All right. I am going to bring the presentation back up because we have another poll question at this point. Are you ready for me to send that one out?
I'm ready.
Okay. So does your family have a clear family employment policy? Please answer yes or no, and I will get off the screen here, Christina.
Okay. So why is this important, and how is this governance? Well, it is governance. Kind of like I was saying earlier when I was talking about in-laws or not. It is really hard to not have any like rules of the game. And we don't create rules of the game when we're a family of 4. And we might not create them when we're a family of 8. But we suddenly go from 8 to 16 to 30 to who knows what. And the values in different households aren't all the same. Nuclear family, same parents, same understanding. But as it goes on, things change. I strongly suggest having a family employment policy because it takes away the personal drama that can happen. So many families that we work with at Wingspan have a policy that to be in the business, you have to go to a 4-year college, you have to work somewhere else for 3 years, and then you come into the business, but you can never work directly for a family member until some time period. I also am a big fan of having a in-law policy in your family business. Now, why? Because not all in-laws are capable of working in family businesses. It gets really tough when you add the complexity of already having family, already having a business together, already having wealth intertwined, and then you're evaluating each other's spouses. Bad, 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 bad. Now, people disagree and say, well, the best talent should be the best talent and our spouses should work in the business. I'll tell you, it goes wrong more than it goes right. And if you are going to do that, you have to decide, like, what is your policy around divorce? So if you have a family employment policy that allows everyone and you have in-laws in your business and somebody gets a divorce, are you going to fire that person? So suddenly they've not only lost their marriage, but now they're out of a job. It's mixing way too much together in my view, but I'll be curious to hear what those of you say about it. Do we have the results, David?
We do indeed. This one's a little interesting. Only 28.5% have 28.6, let's call it, have a family employment policy. So 71.4 do not, 71.4%. And I've sent those results out to the audience.
And so what I'd be curious about, if anyone wants to write in that doesn't have it, do you not have one because you've never thought of it? Or do you not have one because your family's still too small in your view? I would love to know why. And then I'd love to hear from a couple people that do have it if it came out of a bad situation. In other words, you didn't have one, something went wrong, and then you added one. But it would be interesting to hear that at some point when David comes back. But for the time being, I want to go back and kind of review again what families don't talk about, which we've gone through that a little bit with the polls. But families do not talk about retirement. They don't talk about exits. They rarely talk about compensation. I have students every year that come back after our Thanksgiving break at Harvard and say, I've decided I'm going to go work for my family business. I told them I'm really happy. I say, great. What's your job going to be? Oh, well, they didn't tell me. Well, do you know your salary? Well, I don't want to ask what my salary is. It's crazy because if they were going to McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or P&G and they're telling their family about a job, they'd be like, I'm going to work for McKinsey in the Chicago office and I'm making XYZ. But somehow, because it's their family business, they don't ask the most basic questions, which is role and responsibility, compensation. It's like, we'll figure it out later. It's very, very sad to me that we don't do this, because we should want family members to work in the business, and we should treat them with the same dignity that we would if we offered a job to someone else. And so when you don't offer a job to a family member with a salary and a job description, it can feel to the person coming in that you're just doing them a favor, because it's not necessarily a real job. So if we continue on, we've spent about a half an hour now talking about like what we don't talk about and what are some things that we should. But I want to spend some time talking about how to actually approach these difficult conversations. And many times these difficult conversations are around things that are taboo in general. And added to it is the family dynamic. And then the other thing I want to recognize with all of you is I think that family businesses can be some of the loneliest places to work, and they can also be the most fulfilling, but lonely in that you cannot really complain / information gather with your colleagues at work. You really can't do that at home because you don't want your spouse to feel negative about your family, and then you can't do it with your family. And so there's a lot of kind of going in circles in our own head. And when we do that, we kind of get a little bit angry, and it makes difficult conversations worse because we've been waiting to have them for 20 years sometimes. And so when we think about a difficult conversation, the most important part is to come up with what is our common goal. And you might say, well, how can I know I have a common goal with my brother? Well, the common goal can be that you both want to have a good relationship. The common goal can be that you both want XYZ. The difficult conversation is around something that's preventing that from happening. If there's no common goal, there's no reason to have a difficult conversation. That is when it turns to venting. And so in my experience, the best way to have a difficult conversation is to give the person advance notice. Now, that doesn't mean a month in advance, because then the person that you told is kind of spinning themselves about what they want to say. I recommend 24 hours, hopefully. And this is where it gets tricky. I don't want you to call them and tell them that you want to have this, because if you call me and say, hey, Christina, I need to have a conversation with you about XYZ. Can we meet tomorrow? I might want to jump into it right then. And that is not right. Like, it's not fair to either party. And so when you call them, you open the door for them to ask questions, and the conversation can go sideways, because I might be in a car driving on the highway. I might be in a bad situation. I might be at a doctor. You don't know where I am when you call me. So do not call the person. What I suggest you do is you send them an email, and you email them and say, Dear Christina, I'd really like to talk to you about XYZ. Do you have time tomorrow or the next day? Let's meet at a Starbucks. So you give advance notice, you give a very high level of what you want to talk about, and then you pick a neutral space. And why do you pick a neutral space? If I want to have a difficult conversation with a student and I summon them to my office, there I am behind my big desk and they're there, it just exasperates the power dynamic. If I say, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and we meet on a bench outside of one of the buildings with a cup of coffee, it's leveling the playing fields just a little bit. And so the goal of this pre-setup is to have both parties be able to lean in and not lean out when you start. So number one, that's first. What's the pre-conversation? And then you get to the actual conversation. This sounds kind of a little bit too much to talk about setting the norms, but I find it really makes a big difference. What I mean by that is, let's just say I'm talking, to David. David, can we agree that I'm sure some of this conversation is going to be difficult. Let me get through saying what I'm going to say without interrupting, and then you say what you say without me interrupting, because I think we both should be heard instead of, the other person kind of trying to interject and refute things along the way. And so you set the norms, and then you reset the objective / goal, which is, David, I want to sit down and talk to you because I believe that if we collaborate on changing how we do sales, we're going to sell more and the company's going to do better. And I just need to talk to you about this. And the most important part next is, it is never just David's fault. And so I believe you should always start with a personal vulnerability. So if we're talking about sales, it can be, listen, I've been in your role, or I can't even imagine doing your role. It's so hard and you do a great job. I do think there are some ways that we could possibly improve. And so you show vulnerability about, like, it's not like I'm perfect and David's wrong. It's vulnerability and it's sympathy. And then once you get into it, you really have to pay attention to your body language and everything else. People have different abilities to have difficult conversations. One of the two parties inevitably will be more confident and almost, like, I call them like a litigator, like they're ready to go. Like they can refute this and this and this. There's no positivity there. If that happens, it almost turns into a lecture and the other person just kind of backs away. And remember, we're doing it out of kindness because we have a common goal. So while you're going through that, I think you're going to need to make some compromises, and you have to, at the end, clarify how this is good for both people, and hopefully it is. But you also have to agree on next steps. And so one of the next steps that I like the most is, what's one thing we can each do differently? So it's not, let's have this difficult conversation and then, David, you go change 10 things and I'm going to keep doing things exactly like I have been. It might be that we have a communication issue. You like to use WhatsApp and I like to email. We compromise and I say, you know what, I'm going to WhatsApp you more. And you say, you know what, and I'm going to answer your emails. But we have some change in behavior that begins to create new muscle memory. And so that's like, this is a dream scenario if you get through 1 through 8 in a difficult conversation. And assuming all that does happen, afterwards, I really believe in summarizing it, because I think some people come into a difficult conversation with so much emotion, they don't even hear part of what was said. And so write down what you've agreed to do, set roles and responsibilities for who's going to do what, and remain, persistent in like wanting positive change and follow up. Now, if we go all the way back to this slide around um, pre-conversation, what happens if you call somebody or you email them and they say no? Is it over? No. You let it sit for about a week and then you try again. You cannot give up. And so if you see this and you're like, okay, slide 14, my family said no, we don't even go further. No, you have to keep trying. And if you don't keep trying, that is when very bad things start to happen in family enterprises. And so,
quick question for you on the conversation. There was a question about there, obviously family businesses are global, and in some cultures, talking about death or areas like that are very taboo. What kind of prompts might work in a culture where that's part of that culture to get discussion of, let's say, estate planning going?
So I believe what happens in those countries is people are so paranoid about the taboo topic, they forget all the other stakeholders. And so a way to talk about it is to talk about it from an ownership perspective, meaning um, how do we approach the ownership of our business? Uh, if if we all own it in this way, what could cause us some problems? And that leads many founders to say, yeah, what's going to cause you a problem is when I die and you have to pay taxes and you're going to have to XYZ. You let the person come to the conversation about how it's going to affect the business, because the business is something that they love immensely and they're thinking about it. I don't know a founder that's not thinking about what's going to happen to my business, but they don't typically start talking about it. They think about it and think about it. And so if we can get to the succession of the business without talking about death, that is the estate planning conversation. And it comes about that way. In the United States, the best way to talk about estate planning is everyone wants to avoid taxes. And so that's a common theme. I mean, many families are like anything to avoid taxes. Well, that leads to estate planning discussions because we have tax implications of how much you can gift tax free and this, that, and the other. There are many countries that don't have any death tax. Those happen to be the same countries that it's harder to talk about death. And so I say always turn it away from individuals to the business. And that gets people unstuck a little.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, if we go back to what we've been talking about in these difficult conversations, what can kind of get us somewhere better if we do it? If we have a governance policy that's on distributions, that gets people capital. And sometimes most of our problems in family business can be resolved if people understand the flow of money. And so if you talk about it and you create the governance, it happens. Buy-sell agreements. All right, you've got a founder who owns 100%. She passes it on to her 4 kids. They each own 25%. Second child wants to own the business for the rest of mankind, and the other 3 don't. It doesn't have to be that we sell the whole business because 3 want out and 1 wants to stay in. If we have buy-sell agreements, we can have a process by which to talk about this and to say, listen, I want to keep my family steel business. I understand you don't. We have a buy-sell agreement, which means over a period of time, I have the right to buy you out at this price. And I would like to exercise that right instead of selling the entire business. When you have those agreements in place, it leads to 2 things. It leads to the right people owning a business, and it also increases motivation, because if that's in place, the family that wants to keep it, their future generations want to work in it also, because they know they're going to buy more of it. And so it's an awesome tool to have in place. We already talked about the in-law policy. I'm a huge fan of having one. If you want them in, good luck, go for it, but at least have a policy so that it's not one policy for one spouse and one for another, and then you cause problems. Another part of governance that we haven't talked about is prenups. And this seems to be like beyond taboo. Well, what we say at Wingspan is don't make it personal. And a prenup is actually protecting the money of the generation above you that's coming to you, in addition to what you might have earned. The way we think of prenups at Wingspan is that if you don't make it personal, it's just part of the rules of the game. And so what we mean by that is we encourage our families to have one standard prenup. And it's not about, who David marries, who Christina marries, who so-and-so marries. It's about, we have one prenup, and we do that because we want to protect our family enterprise. So in that, it is in-laws do not have access to that. However, we then tell family members they should have their own rules for each of their individual marriages. Whatever the family, what they make together, what they build together. Like, it's not supposed to be governing in this horrible way. It's supposed to be protection of, in our case, in our field, of a family business, where we don't want, God forbid, something happens and you get a divorce. We don't want people that aren't part of the family owning a percentage of our family business. And so I really am a big fan of prenups, but I'm not a fan of them being done when somebody gets engaged. I'm a fan of it being done in advance. You telling your children that you are going to have this, and it's an option for them. If they want to be an inheritor of part of the business, then this is a condition. If they don't, then they don't need to participate in part of that inheritance. And then when the time comes, we highly recommend that a third party discuss it. Never actually should a parent discuss the prenup with one of their children's potential spouses. That is like 101, like setting yourself up for failure. But prenups are a lightning rod. And when I talk about it in the classroom and to many rising gens, most people start to look down, or they don't make eye contact with me because they don't want me to ask them their opinion. But by the end of it, I think most of them are convinced, let's go in a direction that is neutral and not personal. Succession planning and family employment, we already talked about that. Talking about succession planning, just to reiterate, allows you to cultivate better business leadership within your organization. And that doesn't mean just family employees, that means other employees. One thing we haven't discussed is the kind of beauty of having a family constitution and, kind of the intent of the family. Now, many of you might have a family constitution, and if you do, it's probably 100 pages long, and you signed it and you didn't really read it. We do not advocate for those type of family constitutions. We are big fans of the family constitution being under 10 pages, being updated every 5 years, having every individual over 18 in the family sign it. And we look at it as norms for the family of how we want to behave. And the beauty of having it is just the time it takes to write it reminds everybody about the love and everything else in the family. And so, these are kind of, when you get these slides, the difficult conversation that you need to have, but what it can result in. And it can result in really good governance. So additionally, like throughout this session, we've been talking about what we don't talk about, and that what will happen. And so if the now gen doesn't talk about some of these things, the rising gen might take these actions or have to do this. And so we talked about succession. If we don't have it right, we might be selling the business. And that's most likely not what the now gem would have wanted. If we don't talk about who can work in the business, we might end up with a lot of family members without motivation or direction or pursuing their own dreams. If we don't talk about ownership, we're probably going to end up in litigation at some point. If we don't talk about your responsibility as an inheritor, the inheritors might not know what to do with the money when they finally get it. And so I really believe the more we share what we don't talk about, it leads to the natural conversation within your family. And the media has done a really good job for us lately with the fabulous blow-ups that have happened in families as a catalyst. However, many families don't see themselves as the people on the show of Succession, but even that plants a little seed in people's heads that they want to talk about some of these things. So, one case, a cautionary tale, is the Mbani family. I'm sure most of you have read about this, and that the founder died without a will or a succession plan that was spelled out, and two sons were kind of left in control, and they started fighting, and it led to a breaking apart of an amazing business. It led to lots of jobs being lost. It led to a family not being close anymore. And all of this could have been prevented by some order and discussion early on. Now, does that mean that none of this would have happened? I don't know. I still think there could have been disputes, but there would have been a legal roadmap of what the father wanted. And this family, I guarantee you, both boys would have respected a father's wish. But not knowing it gives you the ability to infer that you know what's best. And this is an embarrassing situation. And we could have 100 pages behind here of more and more of these, that a simple will or succession plan communication, even to the board, would prevent. And so, do I really have to have that conversation I've been putting off? Don't have it tomorrow on Halloween. Don't have it like the Thanksgiving morning, but you have to have it. And, having it is truly an act of kindness. And I say that because we go back to, you're only having it if you have a common goal. And it's hard to have them. It is so easy to kind of be like, I'm just not going to deal with that right now. But we don't have the luxury of knowing when things are going to happen in our lives that, had we had that conversation, things would be better. And so if you have something on your mind, or you have things that you haven't discussed, you need to bring it up. I am a really, really big believer of, like I said, the amazing impact family enterprises can have. I'm betting on all of you. You rising gens, I'm betting on you. You're going to do great things in your families. You're going to do great things in your business. You're going to do amazing things for society. Why not have the difficult conversations so that you have the governance and the infrastructure around you to keep doing the big, great things, and not be spending your time possibly arguing with family members or being annoyed by things that you could have fixed with some clarity. So I really encourage you to understand the role that you have in the world. and that you have to talk about these things to be able to do your job going forward. Respect is a word that we use all the time, both Wingspan and I use it at Harvard. Every time a family enterprise breaks down, it's because of some form of lack of respect. And respect means different things in different countries. And we talked about early on that, well, it's respectful not to talk about death, or it's respectful not to ask these questions. I challenge that, and that there are ways around it to take care of the common thing that you all love, which is each other in the business. And so in doing this kind of difficult thing, which is having a hard conversation, you have to keep respect in mind. And if you enter with a respectful approach and respectful asks, you're going to get a lot further. And we need to keep respect, and we need the respect to keep growing. So I will end with the fact that just start talking. And if you do anything at all, talk about this podcast. Talk to your parents and say, oh my gosh, guess what? I participated in this, and in the polls, I was so proud because our family has talked about estate planning. Our family has done this, but you know what? We actually haven't done this. Why haven't we done that? And, use catalysts from every interaction you have to get yourself into starting to talk about things. And, don't be lonely. And that's the other thing. Find a group. We have a group at Wingspan that is for rising gens, where we put you together and we want you to learn together. But find groups. I mean, the fact that you took an hour out of your time to be with us already shows that you want to keep being a lifelong learner and get better and do things. But don't be lonely. Like, find people you can talk to and talk to them and talk through these issues. And frankly, role play the difficult conversation if you want. I mean, one of the things David and I could have done is role played one. And, you see how quickly he might lean back because he thinks I'm attacking him. But, lean in. And so with that, I really hope that you start talking and talk often.
Well, this has been truly excellent, Christina. There are an absolute ton of questions and comments. First, I'm going to note, yes, you can get a recording of this presentation to share with your family. This will live on the Family Business website, and Christina will make a replay available after the event. There were a couple of comments early on when you were talking about the time to talk about estate planning. And some of them were, I think, really relevant, and I wanted to bring them up. Which is, one of them was related to an agreement that it should be the earlier the better, but there is a fear that kids will be less motivated when they understand this, which this person doesn't agree with. But have you witnessed the lack of motivation from the next gens upon finding out what the future holds for them financially?
So people disagree with me, but I do not find it. I find that many times giving them more transparency motivates them more. And it doesn't make them lazy. But I hear from parents all the time, I don't want to tell them because I don't want them to get lazy. And I'm kind of like, let's go for it. Let's give them the information and the power, and, let's motivate them. Let's teach them how to use the money. Let's invest in other businesses. Let's give money away together. And so I really think that the rising gens are better than many of the parents think they are. And I want to give them every opportunity in the world.
Okay. And then this was a comment, which was, we started bringing our youngest family members into our corporate retreats at the age of 18. We are now at year 34 for these corporate retreats. So I think that that's a great way of doing things here. There are a lot of smiles and, Well, here's one I'll just read. This was by far the best presentation on this group of topics I have seen. Thank you, Christina. So for those of you who didn't get your questions discussed during this session, we will share all of those questions with Christina and her team. Some of them I think she may want to respond to directly. And for all of you out there, I would just say thank you very, very much for joining us again for this webinar. We thank Christina for her participation in this, and I wish all of you a wonderful October ahead. And please do join us for our next webinar. We'll send out details on that soon. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to participate and listen to the next webinar because I want to see it behind the scenes.
You got it. All righty. Thank you very much. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.